Here we are, 50 episodes. When we started connecting the dots, it was really just a hunch that talking honestly about leadership, women's health, and the realities of work might land with people like us. A year on, we've sat with leaders from Saudi to Nashville, talked to menopause, GLP-1s, longevity, brain fog, burnout, and why networks and sponsorship matter more than slogans. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Lou Atkinson and Grace McNamara to look back at the conversations that moved us most, the trends reshaping health and leadership, and what we want to do differently in 2026 for women, for allies, and for the sectors we work in. This one's a pause, a reset, and a bit of a rallying cry. Let's connect the dots. Welcome, welcome. Here we are celebrating 50 episodes of Connecting the Dots. I'm joined by Dr. Lou Atkinson and Grace McNamara, and we have enjoyed a year of podcasting together, and we wanted to take a moment to reflect on our most impactful conversations, the trends, what we see coming, what we're hoping to do next year. So this episode is a celebration, a reflection, and we hope you get a whole lot of wisdom and the key nuggets that we were able to extract from a year of many, many amazing conversations. Let's connect the dots. So, Grace, it's great to see you again. Tell me, you kicked the podcast off and ran with it hard for the first half of the year, solo actually. What were some of the most impactful conversations and key nuggets that you took from those months?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. I mean, and let's reflect as well, just that you pushed me to get started on the podcast. I think we were talking about, really great people in our networks. And because I spend so much time talking, I think, you did the right push on, well, let's start recording some of these great conversations. And that was really the genesis of it. So, really, really happy that we did that. And obviously it was kind of a step outside the comfort zone. And it was a step outside the comfort zone, I think, for a lot of our guests as well, who, some hesitated on being like, well, have I really achieved a lot? And then you kind of go, yeah, you have, and obviously, as we talked about before, getting some of the guests on, it was a lot harder with some of the female guests who are naturally more conservative and naturally more refined to being like, let's not celebrate until we've literally cured cancer. So, no, there's a lot to be said. So, I mean, it's been phenomenal, Jen, right? I mean, if you look at some of the conversations, like we've kind of covered conversations across the world first off, right? And that was obviously very intentional that we would bring together people from different disciplines as well as different geographies and different perspectives and different backgrounds. So, I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to mesh unique conversations together, knowing that people came from different backgrounds and different, upbringings and so on. And that was one of the reasons why I was also very passionate to start this, because I listen to lots of podcasts, and I know you guys do as well. And the vast majority, first of all, they're male hosts and they're male guests, and nothing against that, but it just is different. Right? Like we literally have to, show up differently. We lead differently. Our strengths are different and so on. So it meant that a lot of the things I was listening to were like lessons for leaders. And it's like, I can't really use that in the same way, or, that doesn't really apply, whether it's because of my industry or my culture or my gender or whatever. So it just meant that I was constantly thinking of, we need to kind of broaden this conversation out into how do you do this in a balanced way and what's different and what's not. So yeah, I mean, like looking back on some of the earlier conversations, we were also able to look at the very different cultural contexts. We looked at Saudi Arabia. It was one of the very first a podcast that we launched, and it was phenomenal to have Sade on to share more about just the cultural aspects of being a woman in Saudi, being a leader in the in a fitness industry and in Saudi as well, and obviously one that followed the religious norms there as well. And then we were able to look at different leaders in the same region at a later podcast who didn't follow the same religious norms, but also I was still very proud of the cultural norms and so on with it. So I think it was nice to to look at from the fitness industry to the physical activity industry to the fit tech industry, right to the med tech and, the services and so on. So I'm proud of that we were able to bring together those differences across industry, across geography. Like some of the memorable ones, I think the one I got most emotional on was looking at the episode with Shahara and Mark, the couple,
Yeah.
in Nashville. I mean, two very successful professionals in very different spaces, right? Mark's a CEO of a healthcare system in Nashville, and Shahara runs her own business in the med tech and regulatory space and phenomenally successful. But, it kind of brings back that personal life to professional life and layering those together because
Yeah.
realistically, they support each other and their story was quite, I said emotional as well as as well as empowering that, your partner in life is a huge part of your success in career. And I think that was just one that kind of really resonated early for me as well. And as I say, very emotional, the most emotional one we did, I think.
And also so intentional because Mark was very, very, he had really thought about how he was supporting Shahira and really showing up for her so that he could help her and reciprocally from her side to his. So it was just a real amazing example of a power couple supporting each other at home and career in so many domains of their life. I really enjoyed listening to that one.
And it was nice. It kind of led on to then as well. Soon afterwards, you guys, took over with some of the work with Sade. So maybe let's jump into that one because that was also quite impactful and kind of led to the genesis of a book that you guys are still working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the maybe a little bit of context there is we tested a new iteration of the lead program, which is something that we're still working on at this point because we would like to have a leadership roadmap for women, also for men, but our initial iteration was for women. So we had um, a 12-week program that we road tested last year. And it's 3 phases. So it's about getting reconnected with yourself, getting very specific about your values and your purpose, and then looking at your whole life and passing, the filter of who you are, why you're here, and what you stand for through the filter of your whole life, prioritizing and setting clear goals and starting to achieve them with the support of a community. And one of the exercises, and I'm going to turn it over to Lou. One of the exercises that we went through with Sade Akindele is the life wheel exercise, where you look at your whole life. So Lou, can you in a nutshell explain the life wheel from positive psychology so that we can frame this a little bit better than I'm going to be able to?
Sure, and I would definitely encourage people to go back and re-listen to that episode because it was a really great worked example of how to use the sorts of tools that we were recommending. That fundamentally the life wheel is about looking at all of the domains of your life and looking at your life holistically. Because I think when we think about leadership and our career development and our career goals, we often look at them in isolation and we don't consider the other aspects of our life that are all important. And we always talk as a collective about how success is only success if it's about balanced life. In the same way we
Yeah.
balance, we focus on gender balance in the workplace and everywhere we go. We're also talking about balance for an individual. So the life wheel exercise is a way to identify all the domains of your life that are important to you. So we have some suggested topics like relationships and family and health and sex, which did come up in Sade's, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
that is about looking at your life holistically. We offer you the opportunity to give each one of those domains a sort of rating in terms of how satisfied you are with that, so that you can then identify what are the priorities. And I think often people are surprised that they're doing better than they would normally give themselves credit for in some areas, for sure. I think that's always a good outcome when we get people to do this exercise, but also it shines a light on those areas that we may not have been paying attention to, and therefore they might hold us back in ways that we hadn't really anticipated. So it's a great exercise for just prioritization, and again, making sure you are giving yourself the credit for the things that you are doing really well.
And what a great time of year to do it, when you're taking stock and setting up, when there's the big reset button of the year turnover.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to you guys publishing the book as well, because I think, to your point, this is a good time of the year, first of all, to reflect. We're all setting New Year goals, right? Whether we actually achieve them or do anything past the first week of January is a whole different question. But I mean, there's a few things that were very interesting. And Jen, I think we struggled with this at the start, me in particular, because, we look at the self-help books and content, right? I think it's like 70% are read by women, right? But yet we're also the ones now, the higher educated, and we're coming out of college and universities more. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic but we haven't found that balance, right? And we're trying to, and I say we, we talk about this many times in the podcast, that I've chosen not to have a family, and not to be overburdened by that side of things, because then it's really hard, and every woman is trying to be like everything to everybody all the time, and I'm like, I think it's impossible. I just think we're often setting the bar too high, and this is a really good example, Lou, where it just kind of gives you that context and data around where am I balanced? What do I focus on? What's the priorities? And realistically, you cannot be everything to everybody all the time. You cannot do everything. And you can't be, you can't be the leader at home and at work and be someone that's balanced and getting to the gym and getting nutrition. And it's just impossible. Like, we just live in a world that's just too complicated to do. And I think that was where I found it quite powerful, because I know, Jen, when we were talking about this at the start, I was like, but like purpose and leadership, and it's a bit fluffy, and where's the science? And so I'm glad, you guys in particular were able to kind of balance that. It is about purpose, which some of it is a bit fluffy in terms of the literature. And then there's the evidence and science and tools that kind of bring that fundamental together. So you can find that, credible way of saying, well, where am I? What am I doing? Where do I want to be? How do I get there? And, what are the tools and resources I need to implement, in the next 6 to 12 months in order to get there? So yeah, it's practical. And unfortunately, there's lots of women and men, but mainly women that I was talking to last year, who were all looking at change. They're like, I want to change the job I'm in. I want to change either the situation I'm in. And I'm like, yeah, you got to put some tools and resources and planning around that. And it's not easy. It's definitely not
And
easy.
reflection. I mean, I think there's a whole lot of reflection that goes into that. And just to your point, the idea of having everything and being able to do everything, that's the concept that's sold to us in hustle culture. Like, most of modern society is like, go for it all. But then if you do, take a step back and take a breath, you realize that it's not realistic. And if you know what's important to you, and the pillars of your life that you need to give energy to, you can at least commit to those things, and then have a very clear and elevated no to the rest, right? So that's
Right.
the power of the process, and hopefully create some space for you to take meaningful steps, rather than just treading water, running on the hamster wheel of busyness, which is really easy to do.
Which is where most of us end up. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that highlights one of my sort of favorite conversations, or most memorable conversations I've had, which was around stress and how we cope with that. So we spoke to Krista, who does some fabulous things in that area, and it's certainly something that I've picked up on in the last half of this year, I would say, around the importance of rest and recovery for all of us to be able to achieve our goals and and be our best, and finding ways to implement that into our life. And it's, as you say, hustle culture sort of tells us that we should be chasing all of these things, and if we're not working 16 hours a day, and we're not dedicating ourselves to being perfect in all areas of our life, then we're never going to achieve what we need to achieve. And the evidence just doesn't support that. The evidence really shows that when you take time to rest and recover. And again, without sounding too fluffy, self-care in whatever form that takes, whether it's exercise, whether it's sauna, whether it's reading a book, whether it's going on holiday, whether it's spending time with loved ones, whatever it is that you need to help you reset and re-energize. We have to keep having that conversation around how important that is, because it's not something that's being talked about enough, about the fact that that is something that needs to fit into your lifestyle. And I think Krista was really eloquent about that. And it's not something that's easy to do. There isn't a case of just saying, oh, sure, I need to rest and recover more, so let's do it. But it is really evidence-based that people are more productive and they're more satisfied with their life if they're able to balance all of that hustling with a little bit of rest and recovery.
I think we've forgotten how to do it. Like, I think, we've talked a lot lately about the case for slowing down. That's one of the keynotes we've pitched for the women's leadership event that's coming up at FIBO this year. But of the people that I speak to, more of them, at least in my kind of observation, it's the exception, not the rule, that understands how to slow down and it really can take the restoration that they need from that time. There are also people who get so restless in the slow that it almost doesn't serve them, and I feel like that's probably something that that we need to look at, maybe podcast a little bit more, interview people about, is like, how do you slow down and accept the rest,
And
so,
this
so
is
that you can get the
very
most out of it.
this is very gender specific as well, right, Jen? Because we're encouraging and motivating and realizing that women in particular need to slow down because there's just too much on the plate. We're not having the same conversations on the male side. Whether they need it or not, it's a different story. But we're not having the same conversations, and that's where again it goes back to balance. We're loading women's plate consistently, and I say women are loading their own plates with
Also,
way too much, and hence then are wondering why they're burnt out and overworked and stressed and can't sleep. And I'm like, well, you have to control your plate. And like realistically, I think men do a better job on saying, no, I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, or Z. But they also have, as I think the comedy show talks about, it's great to have a wife.
Yeah,
Like,
it is.
I think I'd be very successful if I had a wife.
But it's socially,
Just putting it out there.
Yeah, it's socially acceptable for men to say no to things, and it's still not as socially
Right.
acceptable for
That's
women to
so
say no
true.
to things. But I think there is, that we need to again keep having these conversations, because I think every one of us can reflect on how much am I bowing down to the social pressure? How much is this internalized from my upbringing, from external misogyny that we all then internalize ourselves? How much is created by our own drive for perfectionism, our own little bit of narcissism, whatever it is? And I think there's no right or wrong. We don't just get to reject societal norms, because doing so does have negative outcomes potentially. But I think knowing the reasons why and then making some conscious choices about the pros and cons of that. So you absolutely can reject those societal norms and say, no, I'm not taking on all of these things. And I would encourage everyone to consider that as a serious option. But it
Yeah.
is about understanding what the downside of that potentially could be, but actually just knowing that we have choices. For me, it's always about, as a woman, knowing I have a choice, knowing I hold the power in my hands. And there is no perfect decision. Every decision you have has an upside and a downside. But as long as you feel you are in control and you are making those choices rather than having them made for you by either the people who are very close to you or the wider world, is the first step in achieving that balance.
Yeah, I've started recording more and more data this year. I thought I slept really well over the years. I would have said, yeah, I'm a great sleeper. I don't have, distraction. I don't wake up much in the night. But I've started using my Apple Watch, and I'm using Elfie to record my sleep along with a lot more other data. And actually, my sleep score is terrible, like really bad. Which is, as myself and Lou talked about recently, I'm ordering the Yojo as nervous vagus nerve stimulator in order to get my sleep better, and in particular, my deep sleep, which is particularly poor, regardless of how many hours that I physically actually record as sleep. So looking forward to that, because I think to your point there, Lou, sometimes it needs the data just to kind of give you a bit of a wake up call of, oh, I didn't actually realize. And, we talked about hormones, and I know, Jen, you've done a body of work on the longevity side and tracking and cycles and everything else. And with a great number of leaders there, we typically don't have enough data. And I'm not sure I talked about this on the podcast, but I had my checkup recently, and I had to ask to get my hormones checked. And I'm like, and she kind of said no. I was like, what? Why is this even a conversation? I'm 41 years of age. I should be getting my hormones checked at least on a regular basis. Which actually brings me back to, I know you had the podcast with David Medahan at Rewell Clinic. So
Hmm.
I'll see him actually next week in order to start my monthly check. I'm going to start getting loads more data for the year ahead. So I'm going to
Nice.
take all of that data that you've done with the longevity leaders and start to actually put it into action. And now Elfie has got integration of lab results, so I can pull in everything into one place. It's phenomenally
I think
powerful.
I think that's such a cool feature. And before I want to talk about David, but I want to ask Lou about Yojo and how the vagus nerve stimulation helps sleep, because I don't know, and I'm sure a lot of people listening don't know. So let's backtrack that for a
Yeah,
second.
we definitely need to do a podcast on this. We really do, because
Yeah.
it's, again, thinking about where we were a year ago when this podcast started, and the conversations that have been going on over that year have changed, as they do. And that sort of, I think vagus nerve stimulation is going to be a huge trend for next year. But
Okay.
in a nutshell, what it does is it uses an electrical pulse to sort of painlessly and non-invasively activate your vagus nerve. Your nerve is the pathway, the main pathway to your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and
Okay.
digest part, which works in opposition to balance out the fight or flight part of your nervous system. And ultimately, Yojo exists as vagus nerve stimulation and habit formation company to counteract this chronic fight or flight mode that the majority of us are in. So exactly what we were talking about, where we're all under a lot of pressure, putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to do a million things at once. And what that does is leaves us in this chronic stress mode where our body's constantly flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. And by activating the vagus nerve, we improve our autonomic flexibility, which is the ability of the body to switch between those two systems as appropriate. So the problem is, we're always in fight or flight mode. That creates a lot of inflammation. It affects our cognition, our ability to think clearly. It affects our digestion. So the vagus nerve runs all the way from the brain to the gut. So there's big
Wow.
links to your gut health, which we now know so much more about, and how that affects all of our health and well-being. So yeah, it's a way to sort of shortcut your body's ability to switch back into rest and digest mode when it's appropriate. You can do vagus nerve stimulation naturally, so without a device, through things like cold immersion and humming and gargling and breath work and meditation. But Yojo exists because we all have too many things on our plate.
Yeah.
So, so finding,
And when is the last
yes,
time you gargled?
exactly, finding 10-20 minutes to do breath work is like, where am I going to find that in my day? So but coming back to so you can do it passively, basically using this device. It goes in your ear. It's like wearing an earbud. You can do it while you're having a meeting, recording a podcast, going for a walk, or reading a book, anything you like. But to answer your question, Jen, about sleep, so of course, in order for us to have good quality sleep, we don't want to be in that fight or flight mode. And personally, that's where I've used it, and I found the most benefit for it. I use it as part of my sleep hygiene routine. So I do my wind down. I have my dark room, my cool room, no screens. and you can use it directly before you go to bed. You can use it any time of the day. And to your point, Grace, about data, yes, we love data. So what Yojo also has the ability to do is to record your biometrics before and after your vagus nerve stimulation session. So we actually can build data, and then your personal well-being coach will interpret that data for you and feed that back and have conversations with you about it. So yeah, for anyone looking for support with sleep, recovery, and stress, it's definitely something we should do a podcast on, and I can talk more about it.
Yeah.
Yes, we're definitely doing that, because I don't know many people who don't need help with sleep, recovery, and and stress.
Yeah.
And I also was just connecting a dot. In the Elfie app, there's a face scan that gives you a score on whether you're in fight, flight, or rest and digest. So that's another interesting
Alarming
measurement that
data.
alarming data.
Yeah.
I did not realize
Confronting.
I'm always in fight or flight mode. I'm like ready to go at all the time. So yeah, I'm looking forward to trying it. Again, connecting the dot, Jen, this time last year, it was Ian Milan. Actually, he was talking to me about vagus nerve stimulation through a different device. And he's been doing it for over a year now. And likewise was singing his praises 12 months ago. I just haven't had a chance to actually get it on board. So now I'm adamant this is the month I'm actually going to do it. 12 months after I thought about it, but hey, we'll get there eventually.
We get there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
So going back to David, so I've gotten very longevity curious as we've seen the sector that's actually categorized as a sector now by the World Trade Association is really exploding, and it continues to compound on itself. There's a bit of a longevity gold rush, and what I find really interesting is that, and the conversation that I like to have, is that you see a lot of very loud North American voices sort of dominating the longevity conversation. But there's very different longevity perspectives across the world. And they're like having a more balanced conversation about longevity makes it a little less noisy, if that makes sense. So I've been able to talk to some people who are active in different parts of longevity. One of those people was David Maynahan, and he has the Rewell Clinic in Dublin. And basically, the essence of longevity is lifestyle medicine. It's making sure that you're managing your stress, making sure that you're going to sleep on time, making sure that you're measuring it all so that you know which of the dials to turn, making sure that you're moving, and the movement that you choose is actually serving your body, looking at what you're putting in your body in terms of nutrition and limiting harmful substances, and also really importantly making sure that you have that social connection, that community element in your life, and weaving those things together. And that's what his clinic does really well. It's not one particular thing, it's many modalities that are personalized to the individual based on the needs. And actually, what he said in terms that was a big takeaway for me is that his biggest customer base is the menopausal woman. So not surprising, because the way that I like to describe myself at this point is leaky and creaky. So there's a lot of things to fix, and that I would like to get support with. So I can imagine there's a market for people who are getting very proactive about feeling better.
Well, I like what you did, Jen, with your podcast with Dorsa as well, where you did the tests and then you actually talked about the test and the result with her as well. Because, as someone that's, very curious and reads a lot and listens to lots of podcasts, I think we're in this era where, as women, whether you're 20 or whether you're 70, you're like, how do we not know more about our physiology? And I know earlier this week, right, I shared some of the stats on the research, and let me just call some of these out because we haven't shared these on podcasts before, and I'm sure there's some nuance with these data, but in general terms, they look accurate. So less than 40% of exercise science research indicates women at all, right? madness. 6 to 8% of studies include only female populations, right? So the athlete population there. Less than 1% are considered well designed, which is shocking. So there's a body of work on the research world that needs to be improved, whether it's access or whether it's inclusion criteria. Only 5% of studies on female take into account the menstrual cycle or hormone contraceptions. Like that's mental. And then 40% of fertile women use hormonal contraceptions, which does impact everything else. So there's just so many nuances and variables that we're flying blind. And to your point, Jen, like, and this is why I loved what you did with Dorsa, and I'm going to do hopefully the same with David and others, is we need better data. And actually, in one way, I love Brian Johnson. I love following his stuff. Now, I'm not on it all the time, but I love what he's doing, right? He's experimenting and he's sharing, and he's not saying it's the only way forward, but he is pushing the needle a bit. And I think we need more women to do that, right? Being like, what is it? Because if we, if the natural female physiology everything applied to what he was doing, it wouldn't. We're just too many variables in there to recognize it that way. So we just need to find more female Brian Johnsons.
But I think
I'm not funded the same way, but if someone wants to fund me, I'll happily do it.
I would say that most women are female Brian Johnsons because we've had the hack our whole lives because we can't fit in the mold that's being presented to us. So I think this is just my challenge here. Yeah, we just don't have the data. It's like we've had to figure out things that work for us. We've had to adjust our medication amounts because we didn't respond to them and our doctors didn't listen to us. We've had to seek alternative tests that weren't provided because we were ignored or our pain was ignored. So I would say you've probably got a whole population of Brian Johnsons. We just haven't been documenting it.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think in terms of if we think about positives over the last year as well, we've continued, I think, to see more open conversations about these things, because I totally agree, Jen. I think every single woman is a one woman, N of one study, right? In trying to figure out her own body because we don't have the science for it. But at least now we are having conversations, and not just among women, we're actually talking openly about it in the rest of the world, in the workplace as well. I was on stage. I was on a panel at the Health and Fitness Association Congress in Amsterdam in October. And I had an attack of menopausal brain fog. And instead of trying to fluff my way through it, I said to the whole room of people, please bear with me. I'm having a menopausal brain fog moment. And the thought I just had has just disappeared. Give me 10 seconds. And I was back. And I think the more we can encourage everyone to be very open about it, the more people will realize that let's face it, it always comes down to there's money to be made here. We are all craving data. We're all craving solutions. And what we want are credible, evidence-based support and tools, whether that's pharmaceutical, whether it's, other types of therapies, whether it's behavioral support, and all of that has a commercial value, but we don't want to be sold snake oil anymore. We don't want to be sold some fake supplement that tells us it's going to cure all of our problems. We want evidence-based solutions, and we're all willing to go out there and give them a try, and we're all willing to put our hard-earned cash into those solutions. So, I think that's a positive takeaway, that those conversations are going on more broadly, not just in women-focused spaces.
Just to add to that, because it's one of the dots we connected throughout multiple podcasts, right, is 85% of consumer spend is controlled by a woman. So to your point, exactly, the reason why we start this podcast as well is to talk about the business reasons, the business case of focusing on whether it's, football boots designed for women, whether it's services designed for women, whether it's lab testing, whether it's fitness service, classes or training, or like there's a business reason for it. And if, as you said, Lou, if it's designed for us, we will spend our money on it. We're willing to pay for quality, and we have the resources to do so. We just don't want to pay for crap anymore.
Yeah, don't shrink it and pink it. Actually do the research, and we will pay, the value of that product.
Yeah.
But I think we're now more likely to call that out if we see it, which again is another positive.
Right, right, and it's exactly it. We're now more willing than ever to talk about this, and actually, I mean, back to one of the podcasts we had with the likes of Melinda Nisi as well,
Mm-hmm.
talking about menopause and talking about the solutions that are available. Because if you're not talking about it, you're missing a trick. You're either losing staff, you're increasing absenteeism or reducing presenteeism, or you're just having downtime. Like you're paying for people that, to your point, are having brain fog and not being treated and not being supported. So hence I'm just going to hide all of this. So the business reason to talk about it is really, 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 really strong. And actually, Jen, I think to go back to probably earlier in the year, you did the white paper, right? Which talks about
Mm-hmm.
all of these data points in a very simple, logical way, regardless of whether you're a leader at middle management or C-suite or just someone entering the workforce. You can understand how these dots connect from quality of product to decision to leadership to strategy to your employees or your consumer, right through to the purpose and everything with it. So that white paper might be something to republish again, Jen, I think, because it does connect those dots from the business
Yeah.
reason, the business strategy to the business lead to the leadership and to the gender balance aspect of all of that together.
If you want to target the female consumer, you need to have her in your boardroom,
Yeah.
and on your executive team. Otherwise, you miss the perspective, and you miss therefore the solution for the consumer, the user design.
Right, right. And we talked with many fitness, in particular, fitness industry leaders throughout the year. And it came across loud and clear. There's many great leaders in there, but genuinely don't have enough diversity at the table to have a product or solution or marketing campaign that's talking to most people. Like, and that was very clear. Some were honest about it, they understood it. Some didn't have that understanding because they hadn't really been challenged or targeted before, but it was very consistent with multiple leaders we had across the fitness industry in particular. There's not enough diversity of thought at the table when strategies are being thought through. And I'll give you one simple example, which I think with the conversation we had with Dave Wright, for example, is they were changing some of the product for the MyZone, and it was decided, it was drafted, it was designed, it was costed, it was ready to go until literally at the last minute, David ran it by a woman who's like, no, that won't work for women because we put in the bag itself, we put our earrings, we put all of our stuff in
It
there,
was the
and
storage bag for the My Zone,
simple
right?
things. It
Yeah.
was very practical. And it just meant that with one conversation, he canned the whole strategy and thankfully saved, I think, saved a buckload there on the business side. So it just means that the sooner you involve diversity of thought earlier in the strategy, the better strategy you have. And that's regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of product, regardless of service, regardless of business. If you're going to target a solution that sets for a broad population spectrum, you got to have that representation at the strategy table. And that's not happening. We're not seeing growth of women on the
No.
boards. We're actually seeing a shrinking in some industries of women on boards, which is a
Well,
which is a
there's
concerning trend.
I think for me, what I've noticed over the course of the year, at least within my network, is there's a complete lack of transparency on board on how you become a board member of even a publicly traded organization. Like there's not transparency, certainly not on the pipeline and the appointments or an explanation. And unfortunately, same goes for executive positions. So you don't see a lot of these roles publicly advertised. You don't see mentorship pipelines for women being communicated about either internally or externally. And there's a lot of talk about meritocracy, but there's no proof about selection process and equitable pipeline. So I think there's a lot of talk, and if you pull the curtain back, there's not a whole lot of action, which is really disappointing because, you know, we've seen how fast sectors can move when they need to, when it's important. And otherwise, I've just been around the block a few too many times to listen to the same storyline over and over and over again. I've seen this rerun. I want action.
And that's an important, takeaway as well for everyone listening. And I think particularly the younger population, your network is how you're going to get your next role. Like your network is how you climb the ladder. And that goes back to visibility as well. Like it's easy. And Jen, we've been at conferences together. I like people, and thankfully I'm an extrovert and I can network because and
That's an
I like it.
understatement.
Yeah, I'm good at it, right? But I like it. And I'm also able to get to multiple conferences. I'm able to get to events. I'm able to join webinars. Again, like I've set up my life that I'm able to be very visible and in lots of different places. And not everyone has set themselves up for that. And that goes back to, again, if you're trying to do everything at home as well as in work, it's nearly next to impossible to get to the conferences. And it's about visibility. And actually, Ross Stewart Campbell from Beyond Active talked about that in the podcast with him, where he was also like, get to the conferences, be visible, talk to people, make yourself known. That's a huge, huge important aspect. And he was very clear on that. And I absolutely agree. You cannot be too visible, but your network, whether it's you want to be on a board or you want to get the next step of the ladder, if people don't see you and know you, it's not going to happen. It's definitely not going to happen. And I do worry about the younger generation, Jen, like your daughter, and like they're less visible, they're less socially active, they're less socially engaged,
Mhm.
less able to have conversations with strangers. That's going to be that's a barrier, to growing network, and that's a barrier to opportunities.
Did you ever hear that saying like network equals net worth?
No, but I like it.
It makes sense, right? Because it's who you know is really going to catapult you to the next network or the next level or whatever. I definitely agree with that. And that's one of the things that I'm really proud of that we were able to get off the ground this year was the collective network, which has grown to over 300. It might even be 350. I haven't looked lately, but of women across not just fitness, but all of the sectors that are really working together to make a healthier and more active world. So physical activity, preventative health, fit tech, health tech, um, it, sport as well. So I think, the way that we can move the needle is actually collectively, not staying in our fishbowl, but really starting to swim
Yeah.
together in the ocean and really understanding, what everybody is working on. One of my learnings from launching the network is, the goal of that network was to give women a safe space to promote themselves, to build their individual networks, um, and to introduce themselves. But we've got a shy network. Like there's not a whole lot of proactivity on, this is who I am, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm working on. And we need so much more of that if we're going to break down the silos.
I
Yeah.
agree. And I think we see on the network a lot of people apologizing for, oh, sorry, I've been lurking in the background and I haven't done anything. I mean, never apologize, first of
Stop
all. Just
apologizing.
do something differently. Yeah, exactly. We are programmed as women to constantly apologize. Be unapologetically who you are. Be unapologetic about putting yourself forwards. And ultimately, I think we've all seen since the establishment of that network the power of just putting yourself out there to say, this is who I am, and not necessarily this is what I do, but this is what I want. It's
Yeah.
okay for you as a woman to say, I want this, because that's what men do all the time. They've been for decades, centuries, been going to the golf club, to the bar after a conference, wherever it is, to the squash court and saying, hey, I'm struggling with this, I need help with this, or do you know someone who can do this, or is there an opportunity in your organization? I like the sound of where you work, can you get me in? They don't apologize for asking for those things. And I think we have seen the women who put themselves out there to say, I want this, have received nothing but support and help. And people have made tangible changes in their world as a result of that. People have achieved goals that they wanted to achieve as a result of being that unapologetic person that says, hey, I'm doing this. Who wants in?
I love it. I think the network, to your point, Shane, yes, we've got some very conservative women across the world, and that's no different in any industry, which is why I think it's important. We're breaking down the silos of our industry first off. I think that's important because we all live in a silo. And I think, again, anyone listening, figure out what your silo is and break out of it, whether it's attending a conference that's completely different or whether it's listen to podcasts or join a network that's not in your day to day. That's really important because, to Lou's point, you know what, we're just programmed to be modest, and it's not working. And we did also the white paper right on and a tool on how to get your LinkedIn. I will reiterate it because I know I've beaten this drum a couple of times. LinkedIn modesty should not go together. Stop being modest on LinkedIn. It's not doing you absolutely any favors at all. And yes, as Lou exactly pointed out, there's a massive volume of women and men that will support whatever you want to do next, but you have to say it out loud. You have to put yourself forward. We got to stop refusing to put our CV on the table because we think we might not get it. Stop being that conservative, modest, oh, I'm going to be humble. Sorry, now I'm not going to curse on a podcast, but I really want to, because I'm like, we are not doing ourselves any favor. If you want to achieve something, go for it. But also, this goes back to, you got to be honest with yourself. Are you ready for it? What do you want? And then do you have the plan in place? Again, not putting more on the table. If you can't, if your plate's already full, then you can't do it. That's also about being honest with yourself. But again, LinkedIn. It's an important toolkit. Build your network, build your credibility, and that's a really phenomenal platform to do so. And I just hate looking at profiles that are half filled in and are like, I kind of did this. I'm like, you didn't kind of do it. Whether they did it or you didn't. What bit did you do? Be direct.
And for our male allies that listen to the podcast and have joined as guests, this kind of goes back to that point on, like, if you are serious about gender balance in your leadership team, listen to this lesson that we're giving you in all caps, bold, underline, because it's also known in studies about how women approach the application process. We as a group are much more hesitant to apply for a job that we're qualified for than men, and we see it in our network. And my hope and my goal and my focus for the messaging that I'll put in our network in 2026 is to break out of that habit. But for people who are hiring and are looking to hire female leaders, they need to be coaxed a little bit more. They're incredibly competent. They're rock stars. They just need a little bit of help, coming out of the crowd.
And sometimes just to get out of the way.
Yeah.
It goes back to was it Meryl Streep that said it, women are speaking men language for a long time. We need men to speak women language. And that sometimes just requires listening and just being like,
Right.
you think differently, like explain it to me. And just having the time to go, what is the problem? Why aren't you promoting yourself? Why aren't you putting yourself forward? Why do you think you can't do it? And just listening sometimes and being like, okay, well, what do I do here? Am I a mentor? Am I a sponsor? What's the role that I can play in this scenario? And those are very different terms. I also talk about that in one of the podcasts with Pinky and with Dave Stalker, where we talk about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. Super critical difference. And if you don't know the difference, go back and listen to the podcast as well, because, whether you're a male or female, if you're a leader, you need to be one or the other or both. It depends on what you are to that person is going to be different. And it's important to know the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. We need more sponsorship, not mentorship.
Yeah, that was
frank.
a real aha moment for me, for sure. That idea that actually, yeah, this is what we're lacking, is because I know lots of women who've been mentors and been mentored. And while they've probably enjoyed the process, would be the feedback they've got, it hasn't necessarily lifted them up to where they deserve to be. But sponsorship is exactly that. It's about saying, actually, no, this is someone who has great potential. How do I ensure that they fulfill that
Get
potential?
there.
What is my
Yep.
role in that?
Mm.
And yeah, I think absolutely right. We need more sponsors.
And it kind of reminds me again, connecting the dots back. And I mentioned Ian already, but Ian Milan is one of the examples, right? He's a phenomenally successful business leader. Has had multiple businesses that he's grown and sold. And he's most of his team are female, and he talks about it being like, I didn't hire them because they're female, and that's an important factor, right? Is hire for merit, hire for what they're able to do, and you end up having more women in leadership, or more women at the top, or more women, more balanced leadership. So hire for merit is an important factor, and that came across in multiple different podcasts as well. But it does mean that you need to be aware of your bias, right? As a leader, we're all biased. You need to be aware of the bias. And then it allows you to kind of go, what does this person need? Are they just not, are they what I need? Are they qualified? Are they competent? Are they going to get the job done? And, that's a much better way of looking at getting your team
Yeah,
a
and to
good team.
Jen's point about how you think about hiring and how you think about finding the right people, understanding not just the differences in the way that women tend to put themselves forwards, but also what are the barriers to why are these women not stepping forward and saying this is the role for me? Is it because there isn't sufficient flexibility in the working environment, whether that's about time, whether it's about being in specific places at specific times, whether it's expectations of travel or whatever it is. Most of the female leaders I know do have families and do have a great way of making that work. They just have to be more organized. They have to plan things more in advance. They're less able to potentially do something at the last minute. But the value you get out of that individual for giving them that little bit of flexibility is huge, and that's how you diversify. So, I think the male allies that we've spoken to have been really great about saying, I've hired for merit, but you've got to get a pool of people first, and you're not going to have that pool if you are sticking with your existing quite rigid sort of working practices. And the flexibility in the workplace, again, the evidence shows it benefits everybody. It shows it increases productivity, it increases motivation, it reduces turnover, and that's all genders, and everybody in the workplace. So I think there's still some work to be done around resetting expectations about what a senior leader looks like in terms of how they work, not just who they are.
And let's go back to network for a minute, because if the decision makers who are making these hires aren't intentionally expanding their network to include women, to include at least a balanced network between men and women, this is how hiring works. If that step hasn't happened, then the change won't happen either.
But that came across loud and clear with some of our guests, Jen, is this, there isn't the awareness. Like, I think
Yep.
a whole bunch of our guests, and most of them, as you know, have had a male and female guest with it. And,
Mhm.
they, I got the sense that a lot of our male guests just were not aware that the majority of their network are the more than likely white men, if they're white men. Right. And
Yep.
I say that as we're three white women here as well. We haven't got a massive complement of black women in our network. And likewise, it's a different culture, different aspects that, we're missing out as well. And
Yep.
just the diversity of perspective and diversity of thought, it goes back to the same thing, is if you don't intentionally go find diversity of thought, you're going to be stuck in the echo chamber that we're all stuck in.
Mm-hmm.
And that, unfortunately, the algorithms that we experience every day reinforce the echo chamber
The
over
echo
and over and over
chamber.
again. We have to be intentional, getting outside the echo chamber, getting outside the silos that we live in, and seeing things from a different angle. And it's conversations with people that are not you, that are not even remotely like you. And that's why I think it's great with the podcast. We're able to bring those two things together. I think that's what we need to
Absolutely.
keep doing, that is forcing that intentional collaboration of difference of opinion, difference of background, different of
Healthy
upbringing,
conversation.
healthy conversation. And look, there isn't too many places in society where you can have healthy conversation, disagree, debate, and so on. And obviously it's getting harder and harder in the world we're living in today. but we need to continue to force the conversation of where are we similar and where we disagree. That's okay. It's
Yep.
respectful disagreement and respectful debate still needs to happen at all levels of society, across all cultures, across all silos, across all industries. And we just
Yeah,
need to continue. I think that's where the beauty for me, the podcast, has happened to bring some of that together. And I'm particularly happy and proud that we were able to do that across the world.
absolutely. Let's talk about next year. Let's talk about where we're going, what we're focusing on, what we're seeing. Lou, you've done a whole lot of work lately around the GLP-1, the GLP-1 consumer. What do you see happening in 2026 in that direction? Are you going to keep focusing on that? It's it's a very hot topic. It remains hot and growing.
It is. So literally today, the World Health Organization put out their first ever guidance on the use of GLP-1s as a treatment for obesity. So we now have a global set of guidance. And what's really important about that is that it's a living guideline, because
Right.
we absolutely are still accumulating the evidence. We do not have sufficient evidence yet around these drugs. It's a rapidly evolving situation. But they have already said that there's moderate certainty that this is an effective treatment for obesity in adults, and that we should focus on equity of access, and incorporating it into universal healthcare. Now, that is a big ask from a global healthcare situation.
Hmm.
And again, I know with the work that you're doing at Elfie, Grace, gathering all of the data around those types of things at a global scale is going to be really helpful. But for me personally, I still think we have a huge amount of work to do around understanding how to support GLP-1 consumers, because ultimately most of the people, the vast majority of people using these therapies currently are consumers. They're not getting them prescribed through their regular healthcare professional. It's not part of a holistic healthcare program for them. It is a single use purchase that they're making. They're not getting the supportive care that they need. And my biggest concern currently is that the organizations that have the ability, the skills, the facilities, the workforce to provide that supportive care might get it wrong. So I'm talking a lot at the moment about, we can't scare people into coming into the gym, for example, when they're on GLP-1s, by saying, if you don't strength train, all your bones will crumble and your muscles will disappear. That isn't a helpful message. So we need to work a lot on the messaging, and we need to work a lot. I think that there's a growing recognition, which is fantastic to see, in the fitness and related sectors, that we need to shift the way that we interact with people living with obesity, in terms of our communication, in terms of being able to express genuine empathy and understand that there isn't a simple equation for this. It's a really complex condition, that there are lots of different people living with obesity. It's not a one size fits all. So, I'm really hopeful that I'm working with some of the key people who can make a difference in that world, but I'm always open to working with more and more organizations who see the commercial opportunity, which is significant. There is only going to be an increase in GLP-1 use in 2026. Oral GLP-1s are going to hit the market in early 2026, and that's going to remove a big barrier for a lot of people who don't like needles, and they're going to start using these drugs as well. In certain territories, we're going to start seeing generic GLP-1s come out, which is going to drop the price issue that most people have, not in the UK and Europe currently, but in other areas of the world. So this is a drug that's around to stay, and that commercial opportunity to provide those supportive services is huge. But I think unless people recognize the pitfalls, there could be some serious reputational risk. And I think that's why we haven't seen many of the large sort of fitness brands, for example, really launch into this in a big way. They're still sort of dipping the toe in the water. And me being me, I'm ambitious and bold, and I want to work with people who are willing to say, let's do it right. Let's use the evidence we have. Let's use the expertise we have. But let's get out there and do something, because there's a group of people here who would benefit. And actually, some of the independent gyms that I've been speaking to recently are taking that approach. And I think the bigger chains could learn a lot from that, in that they understand the needs, they're seeing the communities that they're working with, they recognize that it's not a perfect situation, but they're willing to work in the messy. And I think that's where innovation comes from, is being willing to work in slightly muddy waters, but with the right intentions and with the right expertise. So yeah, I definitely see some continued work in that space. I'm going to be at the Health and Fitness Association conference in San Diego in March, doing a panel on GLP-1s there, and it'll be really interesting to see how that goes down in the US market as well. So yeah, plenty to do there.
It triggers so
It's
many
not
dots
going
that we
away.
connected throughout the year.
Yeah.
And this time last year, I was working a lot with Move Ahead, which is a motion cap technology for kids, because unfortunately we have the most inactive kids that we've ever had. And, you know, to Lou's point here is we already have a problem with obesity in the world, and inactivity is a leading cause to it. So we, you know, these are not isolated. And this goes back to like this, you know, again, making sure we're coming outside of our bubbles, because, you know, obesity, it being a condition, thankfully recognized as a condition. You know, we've got behavior change methodologies, we have pharma, we need insurers to pay for it, but then we also need, you know, sports and activity and fitness to get on board with getting more people active as well. And across, whether it's at home or in the gym or in the community, all of these things need to play together, because we have you know, technically an unhealthy, inactive, relatively uneducated, feeling unsupported population that we need to solve for. So there's so many factors here. You know, there's so many dots that we got to connect and keep supporting, because yeah, I think it's an exciting space, Lou, in the GLP-1 space, and yeah, the obesity space, and this layers into, you know, all of the other conditions that overlap with obesity.
Yeah, well, I was going to say there's another dot to connect there as well. One of the first podcasts I was a guest on was with Owen from Matchbox in Ireland, who are doing some fantastic things around having physical activity spaces that are not sort of fitness and aesthetic focused, and are really targeted at people whose primary goal is health and living well into their later years, and managing their chronic conditions. And for me, the biggest opportunity is to bring those two areas together, the health focused activity spaces and the GLP-1s, because ultimately we have to shift any conversations around GLP-1s away from weight and towards health. And these WHO guidelines that came out today, I think, are a really important step. So we can stop having conversations about GLP-1s being some kind of cheat, or just being about how people look, and actually seeing them being endorsed as a long-term treatment for obesity. But actually, again, if someone's goal of going to a fitness or a physical activity space is purely about weight loss, then they're either going to not do that in favor of just doing GLP-1s, and we're seeing that, and we know that the two together bring multiple more benefits, or they're going to do the fitness thing for as long as they're on the drugs, they've lost the weight, and then they'll leave as well. So none of these are a long-term plan for commercial success, because you're never going to hold on to your members. So for me, the ultimate goal for next year is to try and shift that conversation towards how does the fitness sector and the physical activity sector support a health agenda for the majority of people, and GLP-1s being just one tool in helping people achieve their health related goals.
Right. And there's so many tools that we need to kind of surface to people, right? I think, and so we're saying this during the week, Jen, right, is I know what it's like to feel fit, and I love that feeling, and I've been there, and I've also been on the unfit side, so I know what it's like not to feel it. But for people who've never felt it, like you can't explain it. Like there's no way of putting enough words around how you feel when you feel fit, you feel, you know, well slept, you feel well fed, you know, your nutrition is high. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of these stories come out of people who have, you know, shifted their life, and this is a tool that they've used in order to get to a point where they feel happier, healthier, and more productive, and a much more positive outlook, because it's a tough space otherwise, and it's also an exciting space to be in. So yeah, I'm looking forward to more and more of these stories. And to your point, Jen, you know, with it, the year 2025 kind of shifted an awful lot. Every year shifts. I think I feel like my life is like a series of just every year is different. And obviously 24 was different. I spent most of the time in the US. I came back and spent a lot of time with Move Ahead, which and again, loving what Move Ahead do, and they just continue to expand and do phenomenal work in that kids space in particular. And then, you know, earlier the year I met with Elfie and the visionaries that are JF and Ophir, and that kind of shifted my entire perspective, because going back to what we talked about, we've all worked in different pillars of this health space, right? And I think to finally bring them all together is necessary and possible, and to do it well is phenomenal. And you know, the data is clear, like it works. And if we can layer all the behavior change tools that we have into one place, along with the science, along with the tracking, along with the supports, along with it being, it's less about your condition and also being more of a carrot versus a stick, then the impact data is phenomenal. So I'm looking forward to 2025 is leaning into that even more, and working more with more pharmas and insurers, and, you know, going back to equity of access, and, you know, able to bring this to people who typically either can't afford it or don't know it exists or don't know if they've cover, you know, and getting it to the massive population, because it is definitely one of my bugbears over the years, is that, you know, the more money you have, the more access you have to healthcare. And, you know, that's not fair. It's not right. And, you know, thankfully there's a body of companies that are shifting and turning that on its head. So 2026, I think we're going to see more of a balance.
Yeah. And that's a lovely bridge to, you know, I'm going to continue to pursue my longevity curiosity with a little bit of a twist. I'm really interested in longevity services that are accessible to most people. So like what Dorsa is doing with Zova Life, and we really didn't dive into that again, but basically you can get access to a doctor who can give you a personal longevity program, and will check back in with you every quarter and helps you get the resources that you need for your recommendations. And they work with you at every level, so at every budget, at every data point. Like you may just fill in their questionnaire, but you may come in with blood work or an MRI scan. They work with the information that they have. They really meet you where you are. And I think that's absolutely what longevity needs to really be of service to everyone. And we just recently did a podcast with James Mayer, and he's got a solution called Unipod. And Unipod is a full body scan. So you step in it, like imagine like you're stepping in a sunbed, but it's actually a 360 camera that gives you a full body measurement. It gives you your bioimpedance. You get a skin scan to see if you have anything that needs to be taken care of. And they're adding blood pressure next year as well. So, and this is going to be something that you can get for like 40, 50 pounds, and just walk in and out of your pharmacists and get this piece of information. So that, combined with the information that we can get from our wearables, we can plug this all in Elfie to get a global snapshot of our health. It really helps us steer, and it allows us to be, Brian Johnson's, and start hacking ourselves while healthcare is catching up on the preventative side, that we get to learn and look at our data and start steering with our data. I think it gives huge agency. I think that longevity is going to continue to grow. And eventually, I see it eating fitness, because longevity is the holistic approach to life. And fitness is a siloed piece of the pie that really hasn't evolved since, its inception. Like the way that a fitness studio looked in 1980 is not that different than it looks in 2025. So I think that there is a faster, more agile, more complete solution that's on its way. And those peripheral sectors that have stayed siloed need to be on guard.
Yeah, I agree for sure. And I've had similar conversations with lots of people this year around, why do we not have spaces that are taking care of everybody's, a whole person's needs? Again, there isn't just one thing. And I realized I should probably give a quick shout out to David Lloyd, who I've been working with this year as well, as I was a little bit mean about some of the bigger chains, but actually that is an organization who are doing some really great things around the women's health agenda. So primarily, I've been working with them on increasing access to, physical activity opportunities during and after pregnancy, which is a space traditionally fitness, organizations have always been a bit cautious about. They also have a huge workforce development program where everyone has access to training on women's health. They're just about to introduce training on GLP-1s, and this is not just fitness staff, this is everybody. And it's those sorts of initiatives that I think are going to shift the needle to those larger scale organizations becoming much more health aware and much more health focused, and hopefully shifting conversations with new and existing members a little bit further away from just how fit do you want to be, how small do you want to be, how muscular do you want to be, to actually what is it in your life that you want to achieve. And is it being able to run for a bus or play with my grandchildren, or live longer or feel better, or any of those things? So yeah, I'll give a shout out to them definitely as an organization that is moving, I feel, really in that direction that you just spoke about, Jen.
Yeah. Well, I think we have a whole lot to be excited about as we wrap up 2025. There's been some huge steps that have been made, and we're going to keep on trucking in 2026. And hopefully, this time next year, we are at our 100th episode and are doing a celebratory wrap up retrospective, and looking at what we've accomplished in 2026 as people, as sectors, as a collective, as a community. It's been a huge privilege to be part of this journey with both of you. Thank you so much for taking the time for this celebratory episode. And until not too long, we'll do it again.
Yeah, thank you, ladies. It has been great working with you guys on this. And likewise, thank you to all of our guests. We've had people get very vulnerable and open and honest, and
Yep.
and they've taken criticisms and challenges and comments on board. And it is what we need to move health forward and to move connections forward. But yeah, ladies, thank you so much. It's been great. And yeah, to hear us to 50 more episodes of having the conversation and connecting the dots.
Absolutely. We've just generated about half a dozen new podcast ideas just in this one conversation
Yeah,
alone.
Just in
So
this one.
there are plenty more podcasts to come and plenty more dots to connect.
Thanks for listening to Connecting the Dots. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, share it with someone who'd enjoy it too. You can find all of our episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you follow the show, leave a rating. It helps more people discover our work. Until next time, keep connecting the dots and keep building the future you want to see.